when reading Ezekiel chapter 40. It's always a temptation to rush through it. Can you imagine the unsaved reading this chapter? What is this? Don't tell me you haven't been tempted yourself if you've ever read, yourself Ezekiel 40, wondering, how is this the word of the Lord? I mean, what has this got to do with us now? Yeah, okay, I guess I can see where they're giving the measurements of the tabernacle, the temple, and they're going to rebuild it. So, hey, that is something very significant, Isn't the temple supposed to be rebuilt here in the end times? God has all the measurements right here for documentation. Because, the folks are going to be building it, thinking that they're building it for who they think is the Messiah, the Antichrist. But they won't realize. Remember I was saying that Nebuchadnezzar was called God's servant? Well, these folks that are going to be rebuilding the temple for the false Christ don't know it, but they're God's servant. They're actually rebuilding it for the true Christ that's coming back to the earth. For the 1,000-year reign, we're going to have the temple rebuilt for the Lamb of God. But here's something else that's really cool about it. My camera just happens to land upon this. This was amazing to me when Okay, before I mention that, though, I'm talking about reading this fast, being tempted to read it fast, because it's kind of a long chapter. If you listen to Alexander Scourby, he rips right through it. Rips right through it. Nuts and bolts, nuts and bolts, nuts and bolts. Why is this in here? Let's get this over with. And I tried to read it quite the opposite. Take my time. The Lord is being very precise, as he is with his whole word, but here with these details, let's not take them for granted, folks. Every one of these little bits of measurements and everything somehow, in detail, represent Christ's work, Christ's life. All these things, somehow. And one day when we're in heaven, we'll learn these details over the course of eternity. We'll keep learning what these things mean. It's not quite so cut and dry that, we're going to ever get even a portion of it down pat here while we're upon the earth. But once again, back to this pavement thing. I remember, first off, when I was listening to Alexander Scourby, I think before it gets to mentioning anything about a pavement, it mentions something about the steps. There's some things about steps. And wherever that is, there's a few different times where it mentions steps that lead up. 7 steps at one point, and then 8 steps. Not that I'm saying that this is what the steps were. It just made me think about it. When I was in Israel, they showed the steps to Caiaphas' palace. And those are actual steps they know absolutely that led up to Caiaphas' palace. And like I say, not that I'm saying that was part of the original temple or anything, that were part of what's being mentioned here. I don't know. Maybe it is, though. But it made me think of that nonetheless. Well, I don't remember where things are in relation to each other, but I also remember, and someday here soon, hopefully I'll be able to find some cassette tapes that I recorded from everywhere we went. I recorded the tour guide talking about stuff, and I took pictures of things, and I've always wanted to put the two together. And now here with technology the way it is, I've got a slide thing. I can import the slides into my computer, and as long as I can find the little cassettes, I'll kind of get a better gauge of, where certain things were. But, okay, there's those steps at Caiaphas' palace, and I remember going down into this, under a church probably, that's where they always build churches over all these things. But there was down in the basement, there's a place they called the Pavement. And if you've ever been to Israel, probably know what I'm talking about. It's down below street level, but at the time, I guess it was just part of the courtyard of the temple or wherever. But nonetheless, this is where they scourged Jesus. And when I was listening to this chapter, it made me think, wow. It talks about later on here where they would do the sacrifices. Here, talking about the sin offerings and the trespass offerings at the tables. But then it says there's a place where they put the instruments and within were hooks and bands. I just hope I can come upon it here, but as you listen back, you'll hear it, where it says where they put the instruments of the. I wish I could find it. Oh, please, dear Lord, help me find this. Where they put the instruments, they're what they used for the sacrifices. Maybe I've gone by it and you saw it and I didn't find it myself, but it just makes me think, wouldn't it be amazing if where they laid the instruments that they used to carry out the sacrifices for the temple, that's also where the Roman soldiers laid their cat o' nine tails as they prepared the sacrifice. It's really amazing. But somewhere, and I don't know if it was something that I read. I don't know if it was something that I already read, or if it's in another chapter. But it talks about the upper and the lower pavement. Oh, here's where they laid their instruments. I keep looking for that. 4 tables were of hewn stone for the burnt offering, out of a cubit and a half long, and a cubit and a half broad, and 1 cubit high, whereupon also they laid the instruments wherewith they slew the burnt offering and the sacrifice. Yeah, I was right near it. I just now see that. But the upper and the lower pavement, and once again, this isn't, I'm not teaching this, I'm just wondering. When the original temple was destroyed, it was, certain bits were left, and then other things were rebuilt and stuff. I'm just wondering. I'm just throwing that one out there because I don't know what that upper and lower pavement thing was all about, but it makes me wonder if it's part of like the pavement of the old temple, and then when they built the new one, if there was one at a lower level or something. I don't know, because like I mentioned earlier, the pavement now is below street level because of all the destruction of Israel over time. Some of the stuff they excavate, some of it, I don't know the history, but there's stuff on different levels. I remember we went to the Pool of Bethesda, and that was like 2 stories down from where the present level of the city was at that time. That was back in the early 80s. And from what I understand, they've excavated quite more of that, and it would look way different if I were to go back. And one day we'll all be there. One day we'll all be there together with Christ. What a great thought that is, huh? Ezekiel 41 coming up.